The faint hum of enthusiastic pupils filled the lecture hall of the Zorian academic vessel. For this exchange program, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to study the perplexing beings known as humans. They had traveled light years, the tall, bioluminescent-skinned figure of Professor Vixer tapped the holopad in front of the room. As it scrolled through a catalogue of compounds, a list appeared in the air. The kids nodded, their translucent eyes taking in the information. "These," Vixer began, his voice unflinching, "are compounds classified as toxic. Most cause severe biological distress. Some are lethal upon ingestion, while others degrade organic tissue over time. Some took careful notes, while others shrank when particular compounds like capsaicin, ethanol, and arsenic were mentioned." The students whispered to one another, some looking at each other with concern. "Your assignment," the lecturer went on, "is to observe humans in their natural environment and document their interactions with these substances." The notion that humans could voluntarily expose themselves to toxins seemed ludicrous. The species was already notorious for its careless biology. A field excursion to a human settlement, more precisely a busy earthly marketplace, was organized. The pupils followed their guide through the congested streets while wearing hollow shifts to make themselves less noticeable. A multitude of smells, some pleasant, some frighteningly strong, filled the air. A lanky student named Zell stopped close to a food kiosk. Behind the counter, a human was flipping sizzling things on a surface of metal. It had a strong, almost bitter, fragrance. Zell looked at his datapad and saw that the ingredient being heavily mixed into the dish was capsaicin, a known irritant. The human, a man in a worn jacket with wild dark hair, looked up. He held up a little red fruit, its glossy skin gleaming in the artificial light, and asked, "You want some?" "What is that?" Zell said, hesitantly. "Chili pepper," the man said with a smile. Zell paused before saying, "You eat it." The man threw one into his teeth, bit down, and chewed, saying, "This contains capsaicin. It is harmful." Though a slight gleam of perspiration appeared on his forehead, his features hardly changed. Zell flinched as he answered, "Oh yeah, it burns, but that's the fun part." The man put another one in his lips and said, "You are consuming a biological irritant for enjoyment." "Pretty much," he said. Zal faced his group once more. V, a separate student, had paused at another stall and said, "They are consuming known toxins for pleasure." A human woman stirred a pot that was bubbling, and the vapor was dense and somewhat oppressive. The materials were scanned by the pupils. Shocked, V said, "Ethanol. You drinking this?" The woman laughed. "It's called mulled wine," she said, pouring a copious amount into a cup. "This is a neurotoxin," V's appendages said, stiffening. "Warms you up." After raising an eyebrow, the woman took a slow sip and said, "It damages cognitive function." The students looked at one another and said, "Only if you have too much." The list of harmful substances was getting shorter, but not because people were avoiding them. However, they were drawn to a commotion since they appeared to be consuming them at a startling rate. A dark, oblong object with a distinct smell was taken out of a bag by a human. Vixer's gaze expanded. With pride, the person asked, "Is that fermented fish?" The human laughed as Stromzor's datapad made a warning sound that contains hydrogen sulfide. "It is toxic." One kid almost passed out when he said, "Yeah, it stinks, but if you get past the smell, it's not bad." For the first time in his lengthy academic career, Vixer was unable to respond to the question, "How are they alive?" He was still not well. The horrors persisted even after the field trip was over. Every biological concept that the Zorians were aware of was violated by the blatant disregard with which people ingested dangerous substances. Not only was it careless, it was unfathomable. The pupils reconvened in the observation chamber of the Asiatic ship to discuss their results. Video from the market flickered on the screen. The screen remained stuck with a still image of a person biting into a chili pepper. Zol gestured towards it. His body responded visibly, sweating more and breathing more rapidly, but he kept eating it. Real's limbs twisted inward. They seemed to love it. They deliberately caused themselves distress. What possible evolutionary advantage does that serve? According to Zari, the person taking ethanol even called it warming. Silently, Professor Vixer watched, his glowing skin fading with contemplation. A strategy was developed. Direct experimentation would be required, naturally under safe, controlled conditions. We must verify whether this is an anomaly or a widespread trait. By asking a human delegation to board their ship, the Zorians organized a formal diplomatic encounter. The humans enthusiastically and alarmingly accepted. A few days later, the delegation showed up. 3 people entered the room, all of them unimpressive by the standards of their species. Captain Reyes, a female leader, looked around the room with open interest. A man with a scarred forearm and another with a steaming cup of what the scanner identified as coffee, a stimulant, were standing next to her. Vixer spoke directly to them. Reyes glanced at her colleagues and said, "We have been studying human biological tolerances. Your species exhibits an unconventional relationship with hazardous compounds." After hesitating, Vixer said, "Sounds about right." The humans appeared much too eager. "We wish to understand your limits. Would you be willing to demonstrate?" A controlled setting was set up. Each of the test compounds that the Zorians set up had been marked as hazardous by their medical databases. Unconcerned, the humans sat in front of them. The amount of capsaicin concentration used in the first test was significantly higher than that found in the market samples. The disfigured man, who identified himself as Davis, chewed attentively after dipping a piece of neutral food into the hot liquid. After a minute, he smiled despite his cheeks turning crimson and his respiration becoming rapid. "It has a kick." Then twitched his appendages. "You're in excruciating pain." Davis gave a quick exhale. "Yes, but it burns well." The Zorians looked at each other uneasily. Ethanol was tested in increasing amounts in the following test. Reyes nodded, took a sip of the given sample, and indicated that a larger amount was needed. "This is pretty mild," she said. The Zorian adjusted. A stronger version was offered. Reyes sipped again, let out a sigh, and then reclined back, looking content. V verified the results. "Your ability to think clearly should be compromised." Reyes chuckled. "Give it some time." Next came the caffeine test. Lieutenant Harris, the man holding the cup, was already gulping it down. He just raised his cup when he was told about the test. "Ahead of you already?" The Zorians couldn't understand. There were other experiments. The amount of caffeine reached levels that should cause extreme distress. The only thing Davis requested was a glass of water. Raz acknowledged that she was feeling the effects of the escalating ethanol level, but her motor performance was remarkably unaffected. Doses of caffeine were higher than what is scientifically recommended. Asking if they had anything stronger, Harris yawned. The Zorians got together in secret. They had a startlingly high rate of toxin metabolism. "They look for the experience," according to Al. "Are they voluntarily put up with discomfort?" Rowan added. After a prolonged period of silence, Vixer pointed to the humans who were chatting among themselves. We need to know why humans were asked to explain. We sat back and thought, there are several causes though. Some of it is purely enjoyable, while others are cultural. Slowly, as though it were unfamiliar, ZCK repeated the words with amusement. Davis laughed. Yes, pushing boundaries and achieving your full potential. VM found it difficult to understand. However, these drugs are harmful. Harris gave a shrug. Just if you go overboard. Reyes gave a nod. It has to do with equilibrium. Although we are aware of the risks, we manage them, and occasionally a little discomfort adds to the enjoyment. This was evaluated by the Zorian Pro. The idea was completely foreign, yet the proof was indisputable. At last, Vixer said something. Your species voluntarily interacts with dangerous substances, puts up with discomfort, and finds amusement in it. Reyes grinned. Basically, the Zorians were speechless. Despite their extensive scientific understanding, the Zorians were unable to explain what they had just seen, the blatant recklessness of it all. The humans sat calmly, as though they hadn't just shown a ridiculous degree of biological resistance. As he digested, Vix's bioluminescence flickered wildly. The pupils waited for a resolution of some sort while remaining silent and glancing between their professor and the humans. We need to do more analysis, Vixer said at the end. Every known organic survival principle is in conflict with your physiology. Above her head, Reyes extended her arms. Yes, what are you thinking of? More than anything else, the human ease made the Zorians uneasy. They ought to be on the defensive. Hesitant and at least somewhat concerned, they leaned forward with curiosity, as though they were the ones carrying out the experiment. Vixer pointed to the lab room next to it. We must examine your biological responses in controlled conditions, particularly your recovery process. Davis rubbed his stomach and let out a sharp exhale. The kids all shrank together as they said, That's probably a good idea. The chili's already making its way through. The lab was quickly set up. The patients were put in several diagnostic pods with scanning devices that could measure anything from metabolic breakdown to cerebral activity. The procedure started right away. In just a few minutes, the first oddity appeared. The scanner was adjusted by Raylan as he remained reclining in the pod. Harris raised an eyebrow and said, Their cardiovascular systems are highly variable. Is that a bad thing? Z paused. Your heart rate fluctuates significantly. It should indicate distress. Harris gave a shrug. The students looked at each other and said, Depends on what you were doing before the scan. Caffeine probably bumped mine up. That was another issue. Harris's body adapted as though it were normal, even though the stimulant had been taken carelessly. Reyes tapped her pod's side. We adapt. If we stress our bodies, they compensate. Exercise, diet, even environmental shifts, our systems adjust over time. The bioluminescence in Vixer faded. You mean to say that repeated exposure to hazardous substances increases your tolerance? Behind his head, Davis extended his arms. More or less, take alcohol. If you drink regularly, your body processes it differently than if you never touch the stuff. Viren's leg twitched. You deliberately expose yourself to toxins to increase resistance. Reyes grinned. We call it building a tolerance. There was a profound quiet. The scans went on. The tenacity of the human digestive systems defied reason. Capsaicin, which is supposed to cause extreme suffering, only momentarily triggered pain receptors before being metabolized with minimal impact. Despite being neurotoxic, Ethanol was metabolized at different rates, and Reyes's system eliminated it more quickly than anticipated. Even the stimulant coffee, which is supposed to cause abnormalities, appeared to fit in perfectly with Harris's body. Hours went by, the folks didn't care. Finally, the last and most puzzling observation was addressed by Vic. Your body sustains damage, yet you do not appear concerned. Reyes looked at Davis, who was leaning his scarred forearm against his pod's side. We heal. Vic's eyes became a little wider. Explain. Davis raised his arm. This got burned pretty bad a few years back. Skin grew back, not perfect, but functional. Z's limbs stiffened. Your body regenerates. Not instantly, said Davis, but yeah, cuts close, bones knit, burns heal over time. Vic's eyes flickered. Your survival rate must be astonishing. Reyes let out a breath. Depends. We take a lot of risks. Some don't pan out, but yeah, we're tough. Victor looked at them for a while. The instant you voluntarily accept risks, adjust to them, and bounce back from harm with extraordinary effectiveness, Paris grinned. The Zorian hardly spoke at all. Once more, the Zorian had intended a controlled study, but even their most speculative assumptions were disproved by what transpired next. The humans had shown tenacity, flexibility, and an incomprehensible readiness to endure hardship. However, nobody had foreseen the consequences of putting that resilience to the test beyond casual consumption. 6 hours later, the first indication of problems appeared. The person who had taken the most capsaicin, Davis, squirmed uneasily in his chair. His breathing was steady but substantially deeper as he drummed his fingers against the diagnostic pod's armrest. Victor watched him intently. Are you in distress? Davis blew out a breath through his nostrils. Ziri adjusted the scanner and said, Nothing I can't handle. Just my stomach letting me know it's not happy. Davis laughed aridly and said, Your internal temperature has risen. There is evidence of increased acid production. Yeah, that's about right. Spicy food does that. V wiggled his appendages. You knew this would happen. Of course, replied Davis. Doesn't stop anyone. The students looked at each other, their eyes darting in shock. The person accepted the chemical he had intentionally consumed, which was now actively altering his internal chemistry, as an expected annoyance rather than a significant medical incident. With Reyes, the next oddity surfaced. The scanners revealed something the Zorian hadn't expected, but the ethanol had worked its way through her system. The molecule was being broken down with extraordinary efficiency by her liver, which was processing it at a faster rate. Victor gestured towards the screen. Your metabolic function is compensating for the toxin. Your body is actively neutralizing it. Reyes gave a nod. Yeah, that's what livers do. Filter out what shouldn't be there. Vin looked over the information. Reyes extended her arms and said, But the process is not uniform. Z's limbs stiffened as he said, It varies from person to person. Some people can handle more than others. Your species has an internal filtration system that adjusts dynamically. More or less, stated Reyes. Victor was silent for a while, taking it all in. It's not perfect, but it gets the job done. An innate detoxifying system that adjusted to exposure was present in humans. Their ability to use dangerous substances so frequently was not surprising. The last shot came from Harris. Hours had passed since the caffeine entered his system, but he appeared completely awake and non-distressed. He appeared more relaxed than when they had first begun, if anything. Ziri made scanning adjustments. Harris looked at him and said, You should be experiencing irregularities in neural activity. Like what? Harris laughed and said, radical impulses, overstimulation, potential cardiac strain. Nah, this is normal for me. If anything, I'd be worse without it. V's limbs twitched. To work, you need the stimulant. Paris agreed. It's helpful, but some people don't have complete dependency. The pupils flinched. This was integration, not merely tolerance. Instead than just enduring toxins, the humans' bodies adjusted to them and occasionally even became dependent on them. Then Davis let out a grunt. Everyone pivoted. His mouth was clenched as he put a hand to his stomach. Vixer took a step ahead. Davis shook his head, saying, your condition is deteriorating. To their horror, the Zorians said, I just need to walk it off. Z said, walk it off. Again. You're experiencing gastrointestinal distress, and it'll pass. Worst case, I suffer for a bit. It's not a big deal, Davis replied while standing. Vin's eyes grew wide. Davis shrugged and said, you are knowingly enduring internal damage. I've had worse. There was silence in the room. Resilience had been shown by the humans, but this was something other. They regarded suffering as a normal part of life, not only a way to survive dangers. Vixer looked across at Reyes. How often? Does your species experience self-inflicted distress? Reyes murmured. Zal's limbs jerked as he said, more often than we should, but it's manageable. By what standard? Reyes asked, with a little smile. By ours. Vixer had studied biological abnormalities around the galaxy during his career, but nothing had prepared him for human beings. Their bodies were illogical, their decisions were nonsensical, and their intolerance for pain was simply unsettling. The scans were conclusive and the data was voluminous, but none of it addressed the basic question of why. Davis appeared to have forgotten his earlier pain as he reclined back in his chair with his arms folded across his chest. Harris tapped, his fingers nonchalantly against his cup, waiting for whatever would happen next, while Reyes appeared pleased by the whole situation. Their bodies had responded to the chemicals they had been exposed to, and now they sat there as though nothing had happened. Finally, Vixer gave up on the scientific approach, something he had never done before. You have demonstrated astonishing adaptability, he stated, but that does not explain your willingness to endure what should be avoidable pain. Is there no instinct for self-preservation? Reyes tilted her head slightly. Z's eyes flitted. Of course, we have self-preservation. We just don't let it run our lives. Davis laughed and said, that is contradictory. V, still having trouble understanding, glanced between them and said, not really. We avoid things that will kill us immediately, sure, but discomfort. That's just part of living. You intentionally consume hazardous substances. You allow your bodies to endure distress. For recreation, you recover from injuries that would incapacitate most species, and now you claim that suffering is normal. Harris put down his beverage. Look, pain is a signal. It tells us something's wrong, but pain itself isn't always the problem. Sometimes, it's just part of the process. Zell's limbs were twitching. Explain. Reyes pointed to Davis. He ate the chili, right? It hurt. His body protested, but he knew it wasn't real danger. He endured it because the experience itself was enjoyable. Davis grinned, and because I wanted to see how much I could take, Ven recoiled slightly. You seek your own limits. At all times, Harris said, nodding. It's how we get better. Vixer's bioluminescence flashed dimly. You mean that voluntarily? Going through adversity makes you more resilient. Sure, in a sense, Reyes shrugged. The students took this information in quiet as Vixer turned to Zell and Relin and said, "We assumed their biology was the abnormality. It is their attitude. It increases tolerance, teaches us what we can endure." Reyes moved forward and said, "You ever hear of vaccinations? We introduce small amounts of harmful agents into our bodies," Reyes explained. "Not enough to kill us. Just enough to train our immune systems to fight back." Vixer paused, then asked, "Blaine, that way we'll be prepared when the true threat materializes." V's appendages curled. "You make yourself sick to avoid getting sicker. And yet, despite your resilience, you still experience biological consequences." Paris nodded. "Exactly." Davis patted his stomach. "Oh yeah, I'll regret that chili later, but it's worth it." Sri paused. "You do not simply endure suffering, you weaponize it." Davis smiled. "Now you're getting it." Vixer exhaled slowly. "Your species is not reckless. You are prepared." Ray smiled. "We like to be ready for anything." Varen shook his head. "It's part of growth," Reyes said, nodding. "We push our limits and test ourselves." The Zorian had no more questions. "We get knocked down, but we get back up stronger." Vixer gazed at them. "This is why your species survives." Reyes grinned. "Exactly."